Welcome to Dodging Dumpster Fires for Professionals, Handling Legal Challenges in Special Education. I am your presenter, Bernadette Laughlin, and I am an Education Program Specialist for Related Services at the Ohio Department of Education. And I am so very happy you are here today. Thank you for choosing this session. This session is recorded, but I will be attending live, so please put questions in the chat and I will respond. Here's a brief introduction of me. My career is rather unique. I proudly served as a speech language pathologist in the schools for many years. I found that I thoroughly enjoyed mentoring new speech language pathologists and other education professionals. Speech pathology awakened a passion in me for special ed and for improving professional lives of service providers. I went on to earn a master's degree in educational policy and leadership from The Ohio State University, and that led to an interest in school law, getting my law degree at Capital University Law School and practicing in the area of special education. I joined the department 12 years ago as a speech language consultant, moved into coordinating the due process hearings, and recently moved into a brand new position working with the related service providers. Here I am with my family. We are recording this session in July, so the pictures are from the 4th of July. I'm a wife, a mom, a grandma. I have 2 miniature schnauzers, Max and Mason, and I love volunteering, mentoring high school students, and judging high school mock trial competitions. I also love participating in fitness events. Brief disclaimer, this presentation is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. I want you to be proud of yourself. As I said, my passion and purpose is to help special education service providers who provide such vital and important services to our students with disabilities. I know firsthand the difficulties and stresses in your position. I also know how dedicated you all are to your professions and to helping children who struggle with disabilities. You can change the lives of children every day. I am dedicated to helping you. My title is about related service providers, but I include intervention specialists and special education administrators. I also include general educators. We are all in this together. Take a moment and celebrate yourself. You have every reason to be so proud of the work you do on behalf of our special needs students. Okay, so what is a dumpster fire? Here is a little quiz. Put your answer in the chat. A complete disaster. B, something very difficult that nobody wants to deal with. C, a chaotic or disastrously mishandled situation. D, all of the above. Of course, all of the above is the answer, and that is, all of these things are a metaphorical dumpster fire. Dumpster fires, even literal ones or metaphorical ones, are started accidentally often. No one starts out with the intention of creating a problem in special education or a dispute. Quite the opposite. We're all here to help, and yet we find ourselves in problematic situations. My purpose is to help you avoid dumpster fires. The last thing anyone in special education wants is a contentious situation. Our work is so important. Our outcomes for today: you will be able to understand the underlying principle of the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, FAPE, we will talk about that in a minute, know the frequently litigated areas of special education law, practice self-protective strategies, and use winning plans for preventing problems and disputes. So, the legal framework of IDEA: understand the big picture, understanding the why behind the law. We spend so much time trying to remember procedures, checklists, using checklists, learning about rules and regulations, but knowing why is very helpful to understanding what may seem like random or even arbitrary rules. Knowing why simply means you understand the purpose of the activity. We focus on the what and the how a lot, but we do need to understand the why. And so here's another quiz. When was IDEA, the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, passed? And I'll give you a clue. When it was first passed, it was called something else, the Education for Handicapped Children Act. Put your answer in the chat. A, 1985, B, 1954, C, 2004, or D, 1975? If you answered D, 1975, you're correct. Prior to that, public schools could legally prevent students with disabilities from attending, and they often did so. Even if students with disabilities were allowed to attend, the school had no obligation to educate them. Imagine that. They could just keep failing until they dropped out. I remember an older teacher telling me once that back in the 40s, there was a deaf child in her class who basically sat there all day. That child could not hear. He did sign, but they didn't have a sign language interpreter for him. He just sat there all day, never understanding anything that was happening. So what is FAPE? What does that stand for? Here's another quiz for you. This is an acronym. FAPE, what does the acronym stand for? A, Fundamental Access to Public Education. B, Family Act for Public Education. C, Free Appropriate Public Education. D, Free Access to a Premier Education. C is the correct answer here. Free Appropriate Public Education. And as we will see, the word appropriate is very important in that acronym. Okay, so what does FAPE mean? These are right out of the regulation. It must be, the education must be provided at public expense. It must meet the state standards for education, include an appropriate education in a public school. So for example, that deaf child that had no interpreter, that was not an appropriate education for him. He needed a sign language interpreter. 4 are provided in conformity with an individualized education program, or IEP. What does FAPE look like in practice? To a service provider, following special education procedures, developing an IEP that is reasonably calculated for the child to make progress in light of their circumstances, and that is right out of the regulations, implementing that IEP and making sure that student is making progress on IEP goals and in the general curriculum. So the Andrew F. case you may have heard about in 2017 decided a standard for FAPE. Before this Supreme Court case, the standard for FAPE had been decided by the Supreme Court in 1982 and basically said FAPE meant access to specialized instruction and related services which are individually designed to provide some educational benefit. Some states raised that standard to a meaningful educational benefit, and Ohio was one of them. But as you can see, that was a very low standard. The case was about Drew, who was diagnosed with autism at age 2. He attended public schools in Colorado from preschool to 5th grade. By 4th grade, parents were completely frustrated with his lack of progress. He was never in a regular education room because his behavior was extreme, screaming in class, climbing over chairs, eloping. Parents in frustration removed him in 5th grade and enrolled him in a private school that specialized in educating students with autism. Drew performed remarkably better. So parents came back to the school district and said, "School district, you did not educate our child appropriately. We're asking for you to reimburse the school, reimburse our tuition for the school that can educate him." This case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and this was the standard, reasonably calculated to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. And here is a link to a YouTube video about the Andrew F. case. That's very good. There are quite a few YouTube videos about Andrew F., but if this is by Sandra Reddy is a particularly good one if you just want kind of a quick overview of that case. So let's talk about disputes. If the parent and the LEA, which is the local educational agency, school district, can't resolve the conflict, the formal processes are provided in the law. Formal written complaints, those are state complaints where a parent or anyone, an organization, can write to the state education agency complaining about a school district, and that will be investigated. Then there's due process and alternative dispute resolution, ADR, mediation. So alternative dispute resolution, mediation, is increasingly popular because it lets the parties decide how they will decide their case. Mediators help parties see the other party's position and avoid making a disagreement more adversarial. IEP facilitation is also becoming popular, a neutral third party works with the IEP team to reach a consensus. The state education agencies will provide mediators and IEP facilitators at no expense to the school district or the parent. Many administrators are taking training in IEP facilitation so that they can facilitate the IEP meetings. Okay, so what is due process? We throw that term around a lot in special education. Parents throw it around, educators throw it around, but what is it? I find very often that people do not know. It is actually an administrative hearing that is more like a court case than a hearing. Only parents and state agencies and school districts can file a request for a due process hearing. And due process complaints are the most contentious and adversarial of all the required dispute resolution processes. And they can be filed on the identification, evaluation, educational placement, and education, the provision of FAPE to a child with a disability. They are the most adversarial of the dispute resolution processes. There have been numerous studies that document how dissatisfied both parents and districts are with due process saying. There's a saying in due process that says, even if you win, you lose. This is because following this extremely adversarial proceeding, the parties still must continue to try to work together to educate the child. Congress never contemplated due process being so adversarial. They certainly contemplated that parties might not always agree, and their solution was to offer due process hearings to say, well, since the parties have the same goal, which is educating the child, then they will be able to work together to resolve the disagreement. They simply did not see it becoming so contentious and adversarial. So in 2004, they added another law that said, okay, there will be a resolution period. That's 30 days to resolve the complaint. Within 15 days, the school district must set up a meeting with the parent and try to resolve the complaint. Who attends this resolution meeting? Well, parents, of course, a representative of the school district, usually the special education director or the superintendent, IEP team members, and the parents in the district decide who those IEP team members are, not the whole team, but certain members. And no attorneys can be present unless the parent has an attorney present too. The school district will be represented by its attorney in a due process hearing. The parent does not have to be represented by an attorney, but many of them are. And the reason I bring this up here is because sometimes service providers are asked to be part of the resolution meeting. We often advise school districts to have someone who can help resolve the issue. Certainly you don't want someone there who would inflame the situation or antagonize it. If the parent is in a particularly strong dispute with an IEP team member, it would not be good to have that IEP team member at the meeting. However, often service providers may be some of the only people the parents are happy with in the school district, and they may have a good relationship, possibly with the speech language pathologist or the intervention specialist, and those people would be useful in helping resolve the issues. In the resolution meeting, if you were invited to do this, you want to plan to practice active listening. I've had many parents say to me, I did not want to file due process, but I couldn't get the district to listen to me any other way. So give them that opportunity. Try to find out what is really going on. What are they really wanting here? Talk about the child needs. Keep the focus on the child. Bring ideas for solutions. Remember, though, there's no confidentiality in this meeting, so any solution that's suggested could be brought up later in a due process hearing. Identify practices, especially that have been successful with that child, and focus on the child's strengths. Plan for emotions. This can be very emotional, especially for parents. And I found that service providers are very empathetic people, and seeing a parent get upset or crying may trigger some responses in a service provider. You can always ask to be excused or take a break so that you can get your composure, because you do want to stay professional in these meetings. And what is the outcome of due process? Of course, the student loses. As we said before, everybody loses, but particularly the student. It's just very much undermined, and due process hearings can take years. School districts bear the cost, and they can be astronomical for the hearing officers, school attorneys, court reporters, transcripts, usually upwards of $200,000. And that's not even referring to a settlement. Also, time is lost, valuable time is lost for everyone, administrators, service providers, and these can be very stressful situations. So we do want to avoid them. Following the due process hearing, we have distrust and cautious attitudes. Families are feeling distrustful and angry towards the district. Educators are very cautious around the family, are dreading meetings, and this does not help us in our collaborative process that we want to have going forward. The negative feelings and the subsequent difficulties. So let's take a minute and talk about types of dumpster fires. Frequent areas of dispute. Remember, we have two parts to special education. We have the procedures, and then we have the content. And of course, the content refers to that FAPE, that free appropriate public education. So what are the frequent areas of dispute in FAPE? Comprehensive evaluation, the failure to conduct a comprehensive evaluation, IEP development, IEP implementation, and placement. The most disputed procedures are the prior written notice and progress reporting. So here we have another quiz. What special education form is the subject of most disputes? Is it the IEP form, the evaluation team report, the ETR form? Is it the prior written notice, or is it the progress reports? Put your answer in the chat. If you answered number 3, prior written notice, you are correct. Prior written notice, the purpose is to inform parents of the action a school proposes or refuses to take. It is the most litigated procedure. Anytime a parent makes a request, follow up with a well-written, in parent-friendly language, prior written notice. Parent sees you in the hallway, makes an offhanded request. You explain to the parent maybe why that request isn't such a good idea, and the parent says, "Oh, okay, I understand. Thanks. You're right. Never mind that I asked that." Follow up with prior written notice. And why does it matter? Well, it certainly matters to lawyers because it's the most frequently litigated, but why does it matter to everyone else? It's required for compliance. It conveys information to parents in a consistent manner. It helps parents understand the contents of the IEP and the IEP team meeting. It ensures parent participation. A very important tenet of IDEA is the parent participation, and it records the record of the school's actions. Progress monitoring data, that's the other form that gets litigated a lot. And the key word here is data. I think everyone is very familiar with the importance of a progress report. However, you need to have the data that backs up the report. A question to ask yourself is, if you had to demonstrate that a student made progress under their IEP, would you have the data to do so? The underlying data has to line up with the progress report. Under IDEA, and this is in the law, IEPs must include a description of how the child's progress toward meeting annual goals will be measured. It's important that it's in the IEP. Okay. So why do professionals end up in disputes? Choose 2. This is another quiz here. A, is it a failure to document? B, poorly written IEP goals? C, incomplete evaluation? Or D, forgery? Please choose 2. Why do professionals end up in dispute? If you chose A and D, you are correct. Failure to document and forgery. Hot button issues, document services that were provided, have a log or note that includes the date, amount of service time, description of the service, setting, progress made on the IEP. Avoid anecdotal information, just stick to data in these logs or service logs. Especially do not make negative written comments about a student. Forgery, one of the first cases I ever had as a complaint investigator, involved an SLP, speech language pathologist, who had forged signatures on an amazing number of documents. This is actually a criminal offense, although it's rarely prosecuted. However, it is an ethical violation that caused the SLP not only to be terminated, but to lose her SLP license, both of them, the school license and her SLP board license. Please, it's just not a place that you want to go. So, strategies to protect yourself. Professional development, that is very important. And that just means I'm so glad to see you attending OCALICon. The first question, if you would ever have to be a witness in a due process hearing, the first question opposing counsel would ask you on the witness stand was, when was the last time you attended professional development? Being very current in your field adds to your credibility as a professional. So attend professional development, stay updated in your field, consult with other professionals frequently, join your professional organizations, get to know other professionals. It's amazing the things you can learn from other professionals. Again, document, be open to new ideas. Don't make statements like, oh, this is the way I've always done it. And of course, only provide services for which you are properly trained. It's perfectly okay if you do not have training in a service that you're being asked to do, to say, I will need some professional development in order to do that. Let's talk more about prevention. Winning strategies. This is to prevent special education dispute. In a 2013 qualitative interview study of special ed directors, communication was identified as the most frequently mentioned conflict prevention strategy. Respect parent rights. The parent's right to participate is a very important tenet of IDEA. Communicate often, but especially during evaluations and annual review times. Always listen carefully to parents. Do not dismiss concerns or brush them off. Warning signs that a parent may be starting to feel like they're not happy with what's happening. Increase communication from parents. If they're suddenly getting emails and text messages from a parent who doesn't typically do that, pay attention to that. Increase questions about your services, when the services were provided, what's happening in the services, are you sending homework home, those kinds of things. Expressing concerns about a student's lack of progress. Gee, I just don't know why Jeremy is not doing better in math when that's on his IEP and you've been working with him in that, those kinds of statements. Requesting copies of records, which parents always have rights to, and that includes service provider records, data, and questioning when services were provided. Jeremy says he didn't go to speech on Monday. What happened with that? Always follow up. If you cannot get back to a parent right away, let them know when you will get back to them. Always respond to the communication properly. Document your responses and all your communication. Document your attempts to communicate with a parent. Investigate any concerns now, especially if it's something that maybe isn't happening in the time you're with the student. If you're hearing something like, well, Jeremy is just not communicating well in the classroom and I don't understand, he's been going to speech. Find out what's going on in the classroom that is causing the parent to say that. Some potential dispute areas to address are to follow your procedures for exiting students from services. If services change in any way, amend the IEP. If for related service providers, especially if you're exiting them from a related service, be sure to do the evaluation, meet with the team, have the data, rather than just saying something like, well, Jeremy doesn't need to come to speech anymore. Be sure that the parent understands why that student is being exited from services. Too often I hear from parents, I was invited to this meeting at school and they took away speech. Be sure the parent understands why the student no longer needs that. Address the student's failure to progress right away. This is very important. Remember that part of FAPE that said making progress on IEP goals and in the general curriculum? Don't let progress go unanswered in terms of lack of progress. So if a student is failing in a class, don't let that go beyond a grading period. If they're not making progress on an IEP goal you've been working on, don't let that go beyond a grading period. Convene the IEP team. Maybe services need to be increased, maybe a different goal needs to be written, but address it right away. Always investigate any absences from your sessions as to why the student didn't turn up. Sometimes adolescent students, for example, no longer want to attend speech services. In that case, it's time to convene a team and brainstorm what needs to happen. Does the student need these related service in order to make progress on IEP goals? If not, then maybe that student doesn't need to be coming to the service anymore and can be exited from it. If the student does need the service, then brainstorm with the teams ways to address that. Document services, again, remember that saying, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. Okay. The evaluation team report meeting. Planning is required and is very important. This is the informed part of informed consent. And this is what will inform how you are conducting a thorough evaluation. So if a parent later files a complaint or a request for a due process hearing saying a thorough evaluation was not completed, you go back to that planning form, because what is a thorough evaluation? A thorough evaluation is what the ETR team decided it would be in that planning. Now, a meeting is not required, but planning is required. So be very sure that the parent is clear what is going to be done in that evaluation, and if the team is in agreement, this will constitute a thorough evaluation for that child. Meet with parents prior to the ETR meeting to review test results. I know this seems like extra work, but there's an old saying that says sometimes you need to go slow in the beginning in the IEP and ETR process to go fast later. Can be very disconcerting to a parent to be in that very first evaluation team report meeting and not know what test results mean or what scores mean. Meet with the parents prior to review the test results, especially if there are standardized scores. Parents often are not familiar with these tests and what they mean. This is a great opportunity to explain it. This is not predetermination. You are not talking about services or whether the student qualifies. You are simply talking about test results. This is what I found in the test results. This is what this test means. This is how your child performed, and explaining what does that mean. Okay. You may want to use visuals and charts to make it a little more meaningful to the parent. Okay, IEP team meetings. There are two parts to an IEP team meeting. There's the content, and then there's the process. This is where disputes often start in the IEP team meeting, and interestingly enough, more often they're about the process rather than the content of the IEP meeting. 90% are process problems, and actually that figure is probably a little bit low. It's probably more like 99%. And I think this is so interesting. We spend so much time crafting an award-winning IEP with measurable goals that align with present levels of performance and great profile descriptions, and then we haphazardly fly into the IEP meeting, pass out documents to everyone, and just hope it all kind of falls into place. I certainly did this way too often as an SLP, and even as a department facilitator sometimes, who facilitated a number of IEP meetings. But here's what I know now. It's so important to have a process. Consider sending a draft to parents at least a few days ahead of time. This will be district policy. There is no law that you need to send a draft, but districts have different policies on this. Some of them require a draft to be sent home several days ahead of time. Some absolutely forbid sending a draft home because they're concerned about predetermination. What I would say is, to address those concerns of predetermination, just consider sending home present levels in the profile section ahead of time. So the parent has a good idea about what all of that is prior to the meeting. And then you can consider doing the rest of the IEP in the team meeting. Appoint a facilitator to your meeting. If you don't use the neutral facilitator from the department, and you may not choose to do that, have someone on the team be the facilitator. Of course, that person may be wearing 2 hats, and that's fine. Let the parent know. For example, I will be facilitating your meeting, but I'm also the district representative, and I will let you know when I have my facilitator hat on and when I'm switching to the district representative. Have an agenda for the meeting. That's very important too, that a process is followed. There is actually federal law, and we will talk about that in the process to follow. Do take time for introductions, titles, and roles. I can't tell you how many times a parent has said to me, there were all these people at the IEP meeting. I didn't know who some of them were or why they were there, or, well, yes, they introduced them, but I don't know why they were at my meeting. I mean, why was the science teacher at my child's IEP meeting? And don't let general education teachers play that game either, in terms of, well, I don't know why I have to be there. The student's doing fine in my class. I don't know anything about special education. I don't know why I need to be there. Or the student is never in my class. They're at the resource room during my class. I don't know what they're doing or whatever. The general education teacher is there to talk about the standards for that grade level, to talk about what the expectations are for students at that age and grade level, and also to talk about the student strengths and weaknesses and how that student is doing with that subject matter. You will also have a timekeeper, and we will talk about that in a moment. A note taker is a great idea. Also, talk about group norms in the meeting. Here, these can be things like one person talking at a time, be respectful, honor time limits, do not interrupt, and you will find it maybe a good idea to put these group norms in writing, maybe on some chart paper or a whiteboard, and then have everyone agree to them. Say, is everyone here in agreement with these groups? This is, again, where visuals, the graphics can help, and they can help with group memory as you discuss things moving along. Now I'm going to talk about time. Many times parents have said to me when they were upset about an IEP meeting that the district set a rigid time for the meeting and said something like, we have 1 hour to get this IEP meeting done. Parents often are very offended at that. And what we know now, we know that that's not true. There's nothing in law about a time limit on an IEP meeting. It's perfectly fine to set a framework, a time frame, but we also know that we can always go beyond that time frame and that we can meet again if we need to. So it's better to let the parent know we have scheduled an hour for the meeting. The timekeeper will let us know when we're within 50 minutes. Then we can decide if we can finish up in that time, or do we now need to allow for more time either now, or maybe we need to schedule another time when we can all meet to finish up. But avoid putting that rigid time frame in. Team members who leave early, this comes up. Sometimes it's a parent who needs to leave early. Maybe both parents are attending and one parent announces, I'm going to have to leave early to pick up our kids. So that would be a good idea to make that parent the timekeeper and say, okay, well, when you get within 10 minutes of when you have to leave, let us know, and we'll decide at that time if we can go on without you in the meeting, or do we need to reschedule. Same thing with a general education teacher or special ed teacher or the district representative, those required IEP team members. Let that person be the timekeeper and then let you know 10 minutes before they have to leave. And then the team can decide, can we continue without them, or can we do a written excuse? And by all means, do the written excusal, have the form ready to be filled out for those required members, certainly not for the parent, but for the other required IEP team members. The agenda, as I said, there actually is an order. Federal law has an order. It's kind of a general order, but basically you will discuss the present levels of performance first, and then you will talk about the In Ohio, we have a profile section, and that's kind of a combined profile, present level of performance. Student strengths and challenges. By all means, discuss the student's strengths. And I, again, use those visuals. I would put it on a whiteboard or on a chart. And don't let the parent say, oh, I don't really know, or whatever. Get those strengths down. It can be very disappointing for a parent to just hear nothing but just, deficit about their child, challenges. Sometimes that can cause a parent to get defensive or just kind of shut down completely. It's very important to highlight the strengths of that child. And that can become important later on in making decisions in the IEP process. Of course, you will have your IEP goals and objectives, and then the services, and then the placement, which is least restrictive environment. Now, if you have a parent who's convinced about, I'm fine, we know what we want. We want to get to talking about placement. That's the important thing here. Say to that parent, agree with him. Yes, placement is very important. And by all means, we will be talking about that today. But federal law requires us to go through a process first. Of course, in the end, you will be talking about signatures and get agreement as you go along in the IEP meeting. When you've discussed the present levels of performance, strengths and weaknesses, are we all in agreement? Are we in agreement that these are the goals and objectives? Are we in agreement on these services so that you can build agreement? Don't wait till the very end of the IEP and say, well, is everyone in agreement? Only to find out that possibly there was an area of disagreement. Remember, silence does not mean agreement, so you need to ask, do you agree with this present level of performance in each section of the IEP? Please use active listening. Use a visual parking lot for off-topic issues. Sometimes a parent may bring up an off-topic comment, such as, I really want Jeremy to be in the science fair this year, and I want to talk about how we can make that happen. At that point, you might say, oh, that is such a good topic. That we agree that's so interesting. But right now we need to focus on the IEP, but we're going to write this down, science fair, and put it on a sticky note and put it in the parking lot and say, we will get to that once we finish the IEP process. And by all means, do that. Talk about that off-topic thing. Avoid any appearances of predetermination, of course. That's very important, that the parent doesn't feel like minds were made up before they came to the meeting or a decision had been made. What is a consensus? We talk about what the consensus is all the time. What we can say is, it is not a vote. Don't take a vote in an IEP team meeting. The consensus means it's a general agreement among the team. Can we live with, support, and implement these decisions? Maybe it isn't, we don't think it's the best decision. Maybe it wasn't our first choice for a decision, but can we live with it? Can we support it? Can we implement it? That is what the consensus is. It's a general agreement. IEP disagreements. Name the options, first of all, and again, make this a visual. If you have a disagreement on placement, for example, the team wants, members of the team think the student needs to be in a resource room most of the school day. Parents would like to see that student in the general education classroom. Put both options up. Talk about advantages and disadvantages, chart them out. Consider the advantages and disadvantages of each placement. Weigh the importance. It isn't a list of, well, we've got a longer list of disadvantages here and maybe only one advantage. That one advantage may be the most important advantage. So you're going to weigh the importance of each advantage and disadvantage. And it's amazing how looking at the advantages and disadvantages can begin to bring team members together in terms of looking at options. Maybe a third out of that disagreement, a third option will be just considered that would incorporate some of the advantages that both parties are coming up with. Okay, follow through. This is very important. Documents, copies of the IEP, the prior written notice, you definitely want to do that thorough, well-written, prior written notice that captures what happened in the IEP team meeting. This is where having a note taker may be very helpful. If people brought up concerns or parents made requests, and ultimately the team decided that was maybe not going to go that route, you will want to document that in the prior written notice. The same with requests that parents make that the team does agree to honor. You will want to develop an action plan after the IEP meeting. The action plan will include what, who, and when this will happen, what will happen. For example, that science fair question that the parent brought up, here is a good time to use the action plan. You might say, okay, science fair help. Who is going to do that? Science teacher, possibly an intervention specialist will get together to help with that. And when will they do it? Don't say tomorrow if you know there's a really good chance that's not going to happen. Put a reasonable time frame and honor it. So often when parents lose trust, it's because there was a lack of follow through at some point. If you have a parent in a high school IEP meeting who's talking about something that happened in preschool, chances are someone didn't follow through. Promises were not kept back there, and the parent remembered that and lost trust. Also, take a moment to acknowledge the IEP team. Thank them for working together. This includes parents, general education teachers, everyone who is at the meeting. Acknowledge their hard work, acknowledge their collaboration. These things are not easy. Take a moment to have a meeting debrief, and we will talk a little more about that in a moment. Okay, how can we build trust? In some cases, we're going to be rebuilding trust. If we're needing to rebuild trust, if you've been in those meetings where parents come in and they just look so skeptical, maybe they're coming from another school building, it's a transition year, maybe they're moving in from another state, and they're looking so distrustful in the meeting, you're thinking, oh my goodness, what is going on here? Chances are they've had a negative experience, and now they just think that, they're very upset with the whole IEP process. No matter where the problem began, though, even if it's not because of the current team, we do have to find a way to work together and rebuild that trust. And it can be a slow process, but it's important. So this is a reason that it's important not to lose trust in the first place. But if you're in a situation where you're having to rebuild trust, be prepared that it may take a while. Okay, the best thing to do is listen. Listening is critical to understanding the parent's point of view. Okay, as I said before, don't set those rigid time frames. Don't rush through meetings. Parents have often reported to me that they felt rushed in a meeting. They've interpreted this to mean the team just doesn't care. They're just going through the motions. Give the gift of time, and it truly is a gift. Keep in mind, as we said before, you may need to go slow at first to go faster later. Rushing through a meeting and leaving parents confused may result in subsequent meetings in which the team has lost credibility and we have adversarial attitudes building up. Go over those procedural safeguards. Point out to the parent that these are their rights. Even if they say, oh, I have that booklet or whatever, take a moment and go over it anyway. Ask if they have any questions about anything they've read in the book. So many times parents are so fearful of making a mistake in an IEP meeting that will have long-term negative consequences for their child. They have called me and said, I'm just so afraid. I don't want to do something that's going to cause problems for my child down the road. Assure them that the IEP process is a working document. The team wants to see their child succeed. The IEP can be amended. It can even be redone completely. Nothing is written in stone. So many times parents think that it is. Well, if I agree to this, then this means that this will affect my child negatively forever. Let them know that is not the case, or sometimes they even feel like they're being tricked or something like that. And I always assure them the IEP process is not about tricking people. Assure them. You as a team may be very familiar with an IEP process. Parents may not. Designate a facilitator who can look to that while other members are looking at the content of the IEP, focusing on goals, objectives, that facilitator can focus on the parents. They may be wearing two hats, but part of that time, they can be focusing on the parent. Remember, facilitate means to make something easier. Have an agenda and follow it. Again, it can be very intimidating. It helps parents to know, well, what's coming? What are we going to be discussing next? Again, make those introductions. Do titles and role. Parents need to know why people are in the meeting, what they are there for. Use those visuals and charts. This is the memory that you're building for the group, okay? Remember to discuss the strengths of the child. Federal law requires this. Don't skip over that. Spend some time doing it. Visuals help with the group memory. It's very difficult sometimes to remember what was talked about or agreed upon in a meeting. Again, put those parking lot items up so the parent doesn't feel like they're being dismissed about something that maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the IEP process, but it's important to them. Create that action plan for follow through, just as to make sure that trust is built up by following through on what the team said it would do. Debriefing. This is to be explicit about how the team is working together. This is an opportunity after the meeting is over to ask parents for their feedback on it. You may want to do this in a follow-up phone call. Make a list of what we're asking, what worked for you in the meeting, what did you like, and what can we do better the next time? This will help you fashion meetings going forward and provide an opportunity for direct feedback. Be clear that the debrief is about the meeting process and team relationships, not the IEP content. Thank you so much today. It is always my honor and privilege to be here and share my knowledge and experience with all of you. Special education is complicated, so don't hesitate to send me questions. Thank you for all the important work that you do. I do want to make a brief plug for our Ohio Related Services Meetup. That title is a link to our Related Services Meetup webpage. All are welcome to attend. We talk about hot topics in special education, answer questions. It's the first Thursday of each month, and the schedule is on that webpage. Thank you again for your attention today, and have a great day and enjoy the conference.
Hello again, it's Shay, one of the Good Life ambassadors and one of your hosts for the week. Are you running in between classes at school or catching sessions in between appointments with patients? We get it, schedules are hectic and demanding, but that's where our on-demand feature can jump in to save the day. We record most of our sessions, which means you can watch anything you missed or want to watch again. On-demand continues into December. Simply log into your account just like you have throughout this week and use the session sorter to access on demand. It's easy. Okay, I gotta go. And you gotta get ready for your next session. See you next time.
Welcome to Mission Inspire, Soaring to Excellence in Data Analysis. I'm Tina Hertzberg, and I'm professor and coordinator of the Visual Impairment Education Program at the University of South Carolina Upstate. And today I'm joined by...
Hello, my name is Tiffany Wild, and I am in the program in Visual Impairment Education at The Ohio State University.
So Mission Inspire was actually the birth of a new mission for persons with visual impairment. So we have a Braille training grant at the University of South Carolina Upstate. And really for the first 2 years, we focused on the Nemeth Code. And now it was time for us to change our focus to STEM. And so we were talking about this at an advisory board meeting, and one of our members suggested that we work on building rockets with students as part of the STEM Bowl portion of the grant. Everybody was so enthusiastic about this idea because we thought this would be a great vehicle for us to be able to really focus with the students about how do you conduct research and how do you gather data for a presentation on their findings. And so thus, the birth of a new mission.